going to essentially try to avoid boring you by reading allegation after allegation or even showing videos of the allegations. They're essentially the same allegations over and over again, so I think you get the general idea of what the allegations are. So this time we'll just do a quick rundown of Ashley Walters' allegations. And the reason I want to go into this one is because her allegations involved yet another woman who, if you've watched my previous Depp versus the World videos, you may have seen a video of her talking about the empowerment of women and how she views it. Anyway, let's just get into the Ashley Walters allegations first. While we were listening to Ashley Morgan Smithline's complaints, we heard her mention another Ashley, and this is Ashley Walters. In this court filing, we find that on May 18th, 2021, Ashley Walters filed a labour lawsuit against Brian Warner, aka Marilyn Manson, seeking damages with pre- and post-judgment interest and attorney fees, etc., for the alleged intentional discrimination against plaintiff on the basis of her sex. This case was filed in the Los Angeles County Superior Court of California with Michael Stern presiding. In the complaint, the plaintiff alleged that Brian used his position of power, celebrity, and connections to exploit and victimize plaintiff during her employment. Defendant lured a plaintiff, an aspiring photographer at the time, into employment with promises of artistic collaborations and creative opportunities. However, the reality was that he was looking to create an environment where plaintiff was subjected to personal and professional sexual exploitation, manipulation, and psychological abuse. The plaintiff further alleged defendant's scheme commenced upon first discovering plaintiff through social media. As set forth herein, defendant set out to groom plaintiff by building trust, dangling professional opportunities, and gaining access in order to ultimately manipulate and exploit her to the point that she was treated like property and offered up to defendant's famous friends and business contacts. The plaintiff also alleged, while plaintiff was exposed to abusive and sexually explicit harassment and mistreatment, she did not learn of the extent of defendant's mistreatment of numerous women until late 2020, when she connected with a support group of defendant's survivors who told horrific and similar stories of physical and mental sexual abuse that resonated with plaintiff, which is a very large part of Brian's defence, and we will look at that next, what his defence is. All of the women are claiming that they connected with each other and shared their stories, and as we know, we prefer that witnesses don't collaborate like this because it creates exactly this environment, and we'll go into that just a little bit further at a later date. In addition, the plaintiff alleged that many of these horrific experiences have been revealed through lawsuits and media stories describing defendant Warner's systemic pattern of abuse towards women. The plaintiff also alleges that as a result of those courageous enough to come forward, defendant is the subject of an ongoing criminal investigation into his abusive behaviour towards women. The plaintiff listed 6 claims for relief. The first 5 claims are for alleged sex discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual assault, interference with the exercise of civil rights in violation of the Bain Act, and the alleged sexual battery in violation of the California Civil Code. Lastly, the 6th claim is for alleged intentional infliction of emotional distress. That's a defamation case, I think. In the prayer for relief, the plaintiff requested the court for an award of back pay, lost wages and front pay where available, along with compensatory and punitive damages, pre- and post-judgment interest and attorney fees and costs. The plaintiff further requests that defendants discontinue the access to and use of all personal data obtained during plaintiff and all explicit images captured of women without first obtaining the express written consent, and destroy any such records, images, or information at the conclusion of this legal dispute, and that plaintiff be granted such further and legal equitable relief as the court may deem just and proper. So Walters, who worked as Manson's assistant between 2010 and 2011, so this is a third woman in the same period. It's like he was doing this to all of them all at the same time, and they only sort of realised in 2020 that they were all involved in the same thing during that time. I find that hard to believe. Anyway, Walters says that Manson lured her into an abusive situation after he discovered her on social media. It reiterates the complaints. Lawyers for Manson, 53, had challenged Walters' timeline specifically as to why she didn't file her complaint within the 2-year statute of limitations. Walters said that one reason for the delay was that she had repressed her memories of the alleged abuse. She undid herself here because the judge noted some things that she had actually put in her complaint. Plaintiff was unable to recall many of the physical and emotional abuses until the fall of 2020, when countless repressed memories flooded back to plaintiff after meeting numerous other victims of defendants and obtaining counselling from a mental health professional, Walters' complaint said. Walters has argued that an amendment to California law that expanded the statute of limitations to 10 years should apply to her case. Well, surprise, surprise, that happens to be the Phoenix Act. That law was meant to allow abuse survivors more time to file a complaint in cases where they weren't aware that they were in fact being abused. Manson's lawyers argued that there was evidence to show that Walters did in fact know that the alleged abuse was happening at the time. Los Angeles Superior Court Judge Michael Stern sided with Manson and issued his order after hearing oral arguments on Wednesday. I would argue he sided with the evidence, because that's what they're supposed to do, isn't it? Manson's motion is sustained without leave to amend. The order said the claims are not applicable to the delayed discovery rule. Plaintiff fails to plead sufficient facts to invoke this rule. Stern ordered Walters' amended complaint, filed in March, to be dismissed with prejudice. So this is the second time that it's been before this judge. And she was given until March to amend her complaint to explain why she did claim that she was being abused at the time, but then claimed later when she filed that she didn't know she was being abused. So Stern's order also said that the new legislation that expanded the statute of limitations for victims who may not have been aware at the time that they were being abused is not retroactive and doesn't apply to Walters' case. I said they weren't going to be retroactive because it's unconstitutional. The Constitution doesn't provide for retroactive laws. In a statement, Walters said she was disappointed, but she remains steadfast and stands behind her allegations. Nobody gets to choose exactly how they process abuse or threats. I am disheartened in the court's decision today, and not for my case, but for the message it sends to other survivors out there trying to balance how they process abuse with arbitrary court deadlines. We will not let this hurdle stop us from shining a light on what happened to me and others. So it does seem that the judge has seen right through Walters' complaint and perhaps even was presented with some of the evidence that has come out in the later complaints which Manson is filing against Evan Rachel Wood's partner, Ilma Gore. Again, we'll get into those shortly. Attorneys for Walters told Law and Crime that Stern's ruling could have a drastic impact on survivors of domestic abuse. We are deeply disappointed in the court's decision today. Of course they are. We clearly pleaded the facts of this case in the complaint, detailing the trauma and abuse Ashley endured, which prevented her from coming forward sooner. While the court based its decision on the timeliness of Ashley's complaints and not the merits, it was based on the merits. She claimed she remembered back then what was going on, and then also claimed that she didn't remember, so I think it was based on the merits. We disagree with the court's interpretation of the law as it applies to equitable estoppel and the delayed filing of abuse claims. Under California law, a party has 60 days to appeal a ruling. She had 60 days, and it is now August, so we should have heard, about her appeal by now. Law and Crime is reporting after Wood came forward on Instagram, 4 other women: Walters, Sarah McNeely, Ashley Lindsay Morgan, and a woman identified only as Gabriella. This woman who is identified as Gabriella has changed her name in the public sphere like so many times. She absolutely does not want to be identified, which is fair enough, but there's also some other weird things going on with that, which we'll come to. So let's get into the reason that Walter's complaint is significant. Let me introduce you to, again,
I am Greta Aurora. I wanted to record a short video in response to the obvious lies within Ashley Walters' lawsuit. She made the huge mistake of misrepresenting my experience with Marilyn Manson, which makes me wonder who her legal advisor is. Amber Heard, is it you?
Good call, Greta.
Like Esme Bianco, Ashley is now suing Manson for money. Her court documents are now public, and Colonel Kurtz kindly brought it to my attention that I am referenced in them. I am not mentioned by name because Ashley did not succeed at recruiting me as a victim, but anyone who has seen my video about my weekend with Marilyn Manson will know she is talking about yours truly. Let's have a look at the 3 points that are relevant to me: 65, 66, and 67. 65. Walters was often required to accompany defendant on various personal and work trips. On these trips, she witnessed defendant's constant degradation of his female fans. 66. In January 2011, Walters traveled with defendant and other staff on a trip to Vienna, Austria. Luggage containing several narcotics, including cocaine, was placed in her name unbeknownst to her. In fear of alerting airport security, she did not object. 67. While in Vienna, defendant met with a young girl. After inviting her to his hotel room, he bragged to Walters about having sex with her. He also texted Walters from his hotel room saying he took the girl's virginity. Note how she talks about the degradation of female fans in point 65 without giving any specific details. Then there's a segue to the Vienna trip, and then she talks about me. She is implying I was degraded. My case is the only example she gives of this alleged degradation of female fans. This is a blatant lie. I was not degraded. I consented to and thoroughly enjoyed everything that happened that weekend. Degradation is a very subjective term, and I am the only one who should be providing an assessment as to whether I felt degraded or not. This sort of subjective language is the reason I cannot take the Me Too movement seriously. But in this instance, a third person is passing subjective judgment on how I was feeling. If she hasn't seen my video detailing my positive experience, then she's just being dishonest and malicious in her portrayal of me. If she has seen my video, then she's either tone deaf or lying on purpose. The worst part, however, is when she refers to me as a young girl. She is intentionally implying I was underage. But I was not a young girl. I was 19, for God's sake. I was a young adult, a young woman. Young girl means child. I was not a child. Ashley and the lawyers she's working with should be very ashamed of themselves. But at this point, this is a lot worse than merely acting shamefully. This is slander, and if she repeats these lies in court, they will constitute perjury. The implications of this are very serious, and I am determined to do everything in my power to not let her get away with these ridiculous lies. As for bragging to Ashley about having taken my virginity, he may have done that. So what? Manson did tell me Ashley was one of his closest friends at the time. He also told me I was the first woman to have ever lost her virginity to him. So this was obviously a big deal to him. Who can blame him for telling a friend about it? I told my best friend about it too. I am going to make a separate video about the absurd sex negativity emanating from all these Me Too type allegations. I am so sick and tired of listening to all these edgy artists and fetish models turned pearl clutchers complaining about men's sexual desires. I was still a virgin at 19, but I sure as hell am much more open-minded and appreciative of sexual diversity than these puritanical morons. What is wrong with these people? Are they hoping the jury will be made of Victorian ladies who collapse onto their fainting couches every time someone mentions human reproductive functions? I want to briefly go back to point 66, where Ashley talks about smuggling drugs. At first, she said it was unbeknownst to her that there were drugs in her luggage, and in the next sentence she says she did not object. But I'm pretty convinced she's lying anyway, because I did not see any drugs in the hotel room that weekend. I spent 2 nights there, and I never once witnessed Manson or anyone else do cocaine or any other drugs. He was just drinking diluted absinthe. Earlier in her statement, Ashley claims, just like Esme Bianco, that Manson terribly assaulted her the very first time she visited his home. But she was okay with it at the time and went on to work for him. Give me a break. Where does Manson find all these weak-willed, asinine women? I don't have the patience to take you through the rest of Ashley's delusional story, but Colonel Kurtz is brilliant at dissecting these deranged allegations, and I'm sure she will do a wonderful job with this one too. I just wanted to make this video to briefly respond to Ashley's unashamed distortions and lies about my experience. I refuse to be used as a pawn in this unhinged game she is playing. I have no idea if any of the other claims she makes in these court documents are truthful, but it doesn't really matter at this point. The fact that a part of her statement is a blatant lie undermines her credibility altogether. If she has some genuine complaints, why mix in those lies? Why not just present what is true? This is all very sketchy and suspicious, to say the least. Also, I now have no doubt it was Ashley who passed my name on to Ilma Gore, who then contacted me on 2 different occasions to offer me the role of the victim in this drama, which is now looking more like a tragedy for them. Although Manson made the mistake of allowing some very crazy people into his inner circle, the good news is these people are not very bright and are not very good at lying. I am confident the truth will eventually prevail in court.
I have to agree with Greta. They're not very bright. They've dragged somebody into it who can attest otherwise. They have underestimated the power of crowdsourced investigations. And these particular women that we are talking about now have forgotten that they have been in the public eye for all this time. But I do digress. Let's do as Greta suggested and listen to her story of being with Marilyn Manson.
This video is not fun to make, but it is necessary. I'd rather not be the person saying these things, but there's no one else saying them, so I feel like I have no choice. I am here to share my personal experience with Marilyn Manson. I also want to share my thoughts on why women must take more responsibility for shaping the course of their own lives. I am not going to go into much detail about the recent allegations. If you are not familiar with these, I encourage you to read up on them before watching this video. I spent a weekend with Marilyn Manson 10 years ago, and I was in touch with him for several months before and after that brief liaison. I am not claiming I know him extremely well, but I do have a rough idea what kind of a person he was at the peak of his alleged abuse spree. I will not go into any unnecessary intimate details unless where these details serve a purpose. We began emailing in the autumn of 2010. He contacted me on MySpace after seeing my modeling pictures. He wanted me to model for him. He wanted to paint me.
Marilyn Manson's art and the way he expresses his art, both in his music videos and his paintings, seems to be a recurring motivation for reaching out to women who he feels are worthy of painting or appearing in his videos, etc. So I'm not surprised at all that he would be sourcing fresh and new faces for the myriad of video clips that he puts out, or sourcing other things to paint. That's what artists do, isn't it?
At the time, I was still living in Hungary. He told me he was visiting Vienna, Austria in January the following year to open his art exhibition and to appear as a judge in the Austrian X Factor. And we discussed meeting up then. In the months leading up to our meeting, we exchanged a lot of emails, and he asked me to send him some more pictures of myself. He never asked me to send him nudes or anything revealing. All the pictures I sent him were fully clothed. In December 2010, I turned 19. Then January 2011 came. A few days before I met him, Marilyn said we were going to say hi and take it from there. It was clear there was no pressure for me to do anything I did not want to do. The day finally arrived, and there I was, waiting for him in the hotel lobby. I'd seen him before at concert a few times, but actually standing there right next to him was magical. He had a wonderful suite at the hotel, and there he was, standing in a corner, waving hi at me. I was surprised how reserved he seemed. I was quite awkward, but he was even more awkward, if that's possible. His PA was there too. She is one of the women who recently accused him of abusive behavior. We sat down and he offered me a drink. His PA stayed, and the three of us talked about all kinds of things, mostly the history of Austria and Hungary. We then somehow started talking about makeup, and he offered to put some makeup on me. Of course I agreed, and he decorated my face with some of his own black eyeshadow and lipstick. After a couple of hours, his PA left to her own room. It was finally just the two of us there, him and me, sitting on opposite ends of a corner sofa, at least 10 feet apart, and that was long before social distancing became mandatory. He still seemed a bit reserved, although I could sense we both wanted the same thing. I walked over to his end of the sofa and sat down right next to him. He touched me on my arms, maybe on my legs. It was still a bit awkward, not exactly what you would expect from a dangerous sexual predator and violent abuser. I told him I was a virgin. Actually, I awkwardly asked him if any woman had lost her virginity to him. He shook his head and offered me some chewing gum. Then we kissed. And from that moment onwards, he became a little more assertive, but not very assertive. It was clear that he wanted me to be okay. I was so very innocent back then. I know it might be difficult to imagine, but it is true. That's all I am going to say about the first evening. But just to be clear, it was all consensual and I really enjoyed it. The next day, in the afternoon, he left to do all the things he was in Austria to do. I didn't sleep much the previous night, so I used the opportunity to take a nap in the hotel. He was back in the evening with his PA, and the three of us had dinner together in his suite. We then went for a short walk around the hotel, taking pictures. Back in the hotel, he put some makeup on me again, and then his PA, who is also a photographer, took some pictures of us. This is one of those pictures. He also played me a song from his upcoming album, Born Villain. The second night, we were both more relaxed, and everything flowed a lot better. Now, I am going to share one relevant detail here. If you read the allegations made by several women against him, some of them state that he beat them during sex, giving them bruises, and they hated it. Apparently, it was a sign of how abusive he was. When we made love the second night, he bit me. He bit my neck. I quite liked it at first, but then he was biting me harder and I bit him too. And guess what? He did not bite me again afterwards. I wanted to emphasize this seemingly unimportant little detail because I feel like it is quite symbolic. It shows how different people have different characters. These differences in character are partly inherent, partly learned. Some women feel victimized if a man does something they don't like during sex. Other women bite back. Yet others say something. Out of all the women telling the same story, not one of them has mentioned they tried to do something to stop him doing things they did not like. These days, women are told it is men's responsibility to ask for consent at every stage of an intimate encounter, essentially before every single move. Some women may want that, but many don't. Many of us like to go with the flow. And even if we all expected men to always ask for consent before each move, we should still be prepared to speak up if we don't like something. We owe this to ourselves and to our partners. If the same thing happened to me now, I'd probably say something instead. It was just an instinctive reaction that I couldn't help. He did something I didn't like, and I did something he didn't like. It happens. By the standards of the Me Too movement, I sexually assaulted him. I really enjoyed the rest of my time with him. He did nothing remotely abusive. I was very young, very inexperienced, very innocent, didn't speak very good English, in a foreign country by myself. I would have been the ideal victim. He could have done to me absolutely anything he wanted to, and no one would have believed me at the time. And yet, he made sure I felt safe, he was respectful and generally nice. He regularly asked me if I wanted to eat something. He clearly wanted me to be okay. Now, I understand, just because my experience with him was pleasant, doesn't mean he was not abusive towards other women. My problem, though, is that the people who are saying that the same man may be nice to some women and abusive towards others, also claim that women who are abused have no role in that abuse whatsoever. These statements cannot both be true. If the same man is nice to some women and abusive towards others, why is that? Doesn't it have something to do with the women? The women are the only variable in the equation. The man is the same. Surely, some women do some things others don't. Instead of crying about how weak and powerless we are, how about trying to learn from each other? I think we need an initiative for women and men to come together and share their experiences of how they managed to escape from abusive relationships and how they managed to avert rape and assault. Let's show each other what they can do to prevent unnecessary trauma. To clarify, just because one has a role in an abusive event or relationship, that does not make the experience any less traumatic. It also does not make the crime any less of a crime or the perpetrator any less guilty. I'm just saying, we are not helping victims by telling them there is absolutely nothing they can do to prevent the same thing happening to them again. I sympathize and empathize with victims of abuse. I am not blaming and shaming the victims. I am blaming and shaming the education system that tells girls there is nothing they can do to prevent rape and assault. I am blaming the culture that tells women they have no power. I am blaming the culture that takes all responsibilities away from women, hands it all to men, and then calls that women's empowerment. Western women are indeed victims. They are the victims of a society that deprives them of all agency and treats them as mindless, helpless puppets who have no say in what happens to them. I am not a feminist, and yet here I am telling women, you are a complete, capable, competent human being. Act like it. Act like you have free will. You may be physically weaker than the average man, but don't believe anyone who tells you you have no power of your own. Anyone who tells you you are powerless does not want to empower you. They do not want you to live as an independent adult. They want you to be dependent on them. If you are abused, you have no role in that, they say. Like Persephone, your calling is to be a victim. You don't live life, life just happens to you. But if you refuse to take any responsibility for negative experiences, how can you then take responsibility for any positive ones? Do you magically have all the power in the world when you succeed in your chosen profession, for example? Now, I might think the way I do because I'm from a country where there are no gender quotas. Growing up, I was taught I had to work hard for everything I wanted to achieve in my life. I was taught I could do anything I wanted to do. I could be anyone I wanted to be. I just had to work hard and prove myself worthy. No one was going to give me anything I didn't work for. I had to take complete responsibility for the direction of my life. Women must stop defining themselves as victims. Schools must start teaching girls what they can do to prevent rape, sexual assault, harassment, and abuse. If you want gender equality, don't just teach boys how not to rape. Teach girls how to get out of dangerous situations. Teach girls and women how to say no, how to speak up, and how to stand up for themselves. Women must learn how to bite back. Education is extremely important, but of course, there will always be criminals out there. Terrible things will always happen to some people. And yes, some women and some men will be abused, assaulted, and raped despite doing everything they can to prevent it. This takes me to the most serious allegations against Marilyn Manson: rape, psychological and physical abuse, harassment, and violence. These are not okay, obviously. These are crimes. And, you know, back in the day, there used to be people whose job it was to decide if a person was guilty of a crime or not. Yes, I'm old enough to remember that before social media, courts used to decide these things. These days, apparently, everyone on social media is a member of one gigantic jury. I am not saying Marilyn Manson is not guilty of the crimes he is accused of. I am also not saying he is necessarily a good person. He was good to me, he could have been bad to others. To me, he seemed like somebody who spends a lot of time in his head and lives in his own world, both physically and mentally, like a lot of artists do. He seemed a bit detached, like someone who has a bit of trouble understanding and interpreting how others feel. You might say that makes him a bad person. But being a bad person is very subjective, and it is not a crime. Rape and abuse are crimes, and if he is guilty of those, I want to see him prosecuted and convicted like everyone else. Victims deserve justice. Alleged criminals deserve a fair trial. It's a bit ironic that I have to explain this with my Eastern European accent, but in Western democracies, all individuals accused of a crime have the right to be assumed innocent until proven guilty, not the other way around. Social media is not a court of law. Record labels and producers are not judges. Finally, for what it's worth, I wanted to show some evidence that the allegations against Marilyn Manson were carefully timed and coordinated. I am not a lawyer, and I don't know if any of this even matters, but I received 2 strange emails from the same woman 3 months apart. Note that she uses the official Phoenix Act email address. You can look up what the Phoenix Act is. I'm not going to explain it here. When I first read these emails, I thought they were spam, but I had a funny feeling about them, so I didn't delete them. I just ignored them. But it all makes sense now. It seems like they did some expert investigative work to track down all the women Marilyn might have spent time with. Note that she sent the second email just a week before all the women courageously came forward with their allegations, knowing the media and Hollywood would be supporting them unconditionally. I really wish I'd replied to those emails at the time. I have nothing to be gained from making this video. I actually expect to potentially lose a lot as a result. It is just me up against the Me Too mob, an enormous army of victims. I don't have a bunch of celebrity friends who are all parroting the same message. The women making the allegations say they were afraid to speak up for 10 years. Me too. I am very afraid to speak up, but I've decided to do it anyway. I had to share my story and my perspective because it felt the right thing to do. I am scared, but I know I would hate myself if I didn't say anything. Once again, I'm not trying to negate the experiences of the women, and I'm not claiming they are lying about these experiences. My goal is simply to bring some nuance into discussions about male and female dynamics. I desperately want to hear more conversations about female power, agency, and responsibility. I am tired of women being incessantly represented in the media as helpless victims. In fact, the Me Too movement has demonstrated just how much power women have over men. All it takes for a woman to completely ruin a man's life is for her to make a vague allegation of assault. A man making the same allegation is not taken nearly as seriously as a woman. To those of you who think I don't know what I'm talking about because I haven't been abused, I have actually experienced what you could call psychological abuse by another musician, and it very nearly destroyed me 2 years ago. But to even suggest I had no power whatsoever to prevent or end that abuse is insulting. How dare anyone tell me I have no agency or responsibility just because I'm a woman? I claim the right to learn from my mistakes. I have a responsibility to myself to constantly keep growing, evolving, and improving as a person, and not to make the same old mistakes again. And it's also important to keep in mind that women don't always tell the truth, for myriad reasons. Also, women can be abusers and men can be victims of abuse too. Male and female perpetrators must all be held accountable and held to the same standards in court. So, to recap, I hope to achieve 2 things by making this video. Firstly, I want to encourage women to see themselves as complete human beings with power, agency, and not just rights, but also responsibilities. I want to cure women from this Persephone syndrome. And secondly, I want to remind people that in the West, we have courts to decide who is guilty and who is not. I had just turned 19 when I met Marilyn Manson. He had a lovely charisma that attracted me to him like a magnet. I was just a pretty girl. That was my only qualification. This experience taught me just how much power women have. A beautiful woman has the whole world at her feet just because she is born beautiful. A man must work hard for years and years just to be noticed by the world. A brilliant quote by Warren Farrell sums this up. Women are human beings, but men are human doings. Sure, women are physically weaker than men, but there is a lot more to the human story than that. If you are a woman listening, I want you to stop identifying as a victim. If you are a man, I want you to know that some of us women are extremely unhappy with the way our culture represents the relationship between the sexes, and we are working to change it, to make it better for everyone. Thank you for listening.
Now that is one strong, empowered female. You may have guessed that Greta will be featuring in Marilyn Manson's lawsuit, along with the evidence that she just showed us. But she is not alone. There are many who have come forward to provide Manson's legal team with evidence that contradicts the narrative. We will cover that next.